Imagine a winter mountain so silent that even the trees seem to be holding their breath. In a forgotten forest called Whitecrest Ridge, a single decision made in fear will set three destinies on a collision course: a guarded police officer, a loyal German shepherd, and a woman carrying a secret that could save a forest or destroy her life. One storm, one lie, and one moment of mercy will decide everything. Before this journey begins, tell me where you are watching from, and leave your hometown in the comments so we can travel this story together. And if stories of courage, loyalty, and second chances still touch your heart, please press subscribe to support our channel so we can keep bringing these quiet miracles to you. Whitecrest City was quiet in the way only mountain towns become quiet before a storm. Not peaceful, but watchful. Snow clouds stacked low against the distant ridgeline, like heavy doors waiting to be opened. The streets below moved slowly, headlights muted by drifting frost, traffic lights blinking through fine white air. Winter had not yet arrived in full violence, but it was already sharpening its teeth. On the 12th floor of a glass and steel office tower near the edge of town, Clara Whitmore stood alone by the window, watching the mountains darken as if they were turning their backs on the city. She was 29 years old, light-skinned, slender, but not fragile, with long, dark hair drawn tightly into a practical knot that revealed a face shaped by discipline rather than softness. Her eyes were sharp, observant, the kind that missed very little and forgave even less easily. There was a quiet tension in the way she stood, shoulders squared, hands resting against the cold glass, as though she were bracing herself against something invisible but inevitable. Clara had not always been this controlled. Years earlier, before ambition hardened her habits, she had been warmer, quicker to laugh, slower to calculate consequence. The shift came after her mother's death, when responsibility entered her life not as a lesson but as a demand. Since then, everything had become about proving, surviving, advancing. Feeling could come later, if it ever came. Behind her, the conference room glowed with muted screens and polite authority. The North Star Land executives sat around a polished table, their reflections multiplying in the glass walls, their words wrapped in numbers and certainty. On the main display hovered aerial maps of Whitecrest Ridge, shaded in commercial green and corporate red, timber yield projections, road access lines, seasonal extraction routes, an ancient forest already divided into profit. "The storm window is closing," Clara said finally, her voice steady, but tight beneath the calm. "If we delay field verification another week, the snowpack will make accurate ecological measurements impossible until spring." Across the table, Matthew Hargrove, her direct supervisor, smiled with professional ease. He was in his early 40s, broad-framed, clean-shaven, dressed always in muted confidence. His reputation inside the company was that of a man who never truly raised his voice because he never needed to. "That's exactly why we wait," he replied. "Spring gives us clarity, winter gives us excuses." The meaning behind his words settled heavily in Clara's chest. Delay meant pressure. Pressure meant silence. Silence meant the project would move forward without resistance. The meeting ended without argument. It never needed one. 2 hours later, Clara was driving north. She did not inform the company. She did not call for authorization. The decision formed with strange calm, as if made somewhere behind her thoughts. If she waited, Whitecrest Ridge would be rewritten as a ledger entry. If she acted now, she might still gather enough truth to slow the machine. Soil composition, wildlife corridors, early runoff data before the deep freeze buried everything. Not a full assessment, just enough to create friction. She told herself she would be quick. By the time Clara passed the old Ranger checkpoint, the temperature had dropped sharply. Snow began to fall in wide, effortless flakes that blurred the road without sound. Pine forests closed in on both sides, tall and ancient, their branches heavy with the promise of collapse. The deeper she drove, the less the modern world followed. Cell service vanished first, then radio. Then, gradually, the illusion that she was still in control. The storm arrived not gradually, but all at once. Wind rushed down the mountainside like a living thing, slamming against the truck with sudden violence. Snow thickened instantly, erasing the road in seconds. Ice glazed the ground beneath her tires. Clara corrected once, then again. Then, too late, the truck slid sideways, The world turned. Metal screamed against stone as the vehicle slammed against the mountainside and spun. The impact crushed the rear fender. Airbags detonated with explosive force. The final stop came at an angle that made gravity feel confused. When the motion ended, half the truck hung over empty space, rear wheels suspended above a ravine that swallowed falling snow without echo. Clara sat frozen, breath trapped in her chest, ears ringing, fingers numb against the steering wheel. Snow drifted in through the shattered side window and settled against her hair, melting slowly against her skin. Pain flared in her right ankle when she tried to move, sharp and immediate, but not devastating. The greater injury was not to her body, but to the illusion that she had ever been careful enough. No signal, no passing vehicles, only the storm, the forest, and the quiet certainty of isolation. She reached for the emergency pack behind the seat with shaking hands and activated the satellite SOS beacon clipped to its side. The light blinked weakly, fighting against interference, sending fragments of a signal into the storm like a whisper fighting a blizzard. The mountains swallowed most of it, but not all. Miles away on a patrol road few maps still bothered to acknowledge, Officer Ethan Cole drove his black Forest Service truck slowly through thickening snow. He was 38 years old, tall and solidly built, his movements shaped by years of physical work rather than display. His face carried the markings of exposure, wind-worn skin, a narrow scar along his jaw, eyes the pale gray of weathered steel. Ethan was a man known in Whitecrest City not for warmth, but for reliability. People said little about him because he gave little away. Those who did know his history knew the silence was not emptiness, but storage. Beside him sat Rook, a 6-year-old German shepherd. With a thick sable and black coat, powerful shoulders, and eyes amber bright with relentless awareness. Rook was trained in avalanche recovery and search and rescue, disciplined to the point of restraint, loyal beyond negotiation. A faint scar cut through the fur along his left flank, the result of a past rescue that ended with both dog and human alive, which in Ethan's world counted as victory enough. The radio crackled with lifeless static. Then the satellite receiver chimed with an irregular pulse it almost never used. Ethan slowed immediately. "Signal," he said quietly. Rook's ears snapped forward. His posture shifted from rest into precision. The coordinates struggled to stabilize, weak, fragmented, barely holding, but real. Someone was out there. Ethan turned the wheel without hesitation and drove straight into the storm. The road grew indistinct, more memory than surface. Snow whipped sideways, stinging against the windshield. The forest thickened, branches bowing under sudden weight. Rook remained steady in the passenger seat, his breathing even, every sense reaching ahead. They found the truck just before the ravine claimed it fully. The rear axle was caught on exposed rock. Headlights were half buried. The engine was dead, its heat already giving way to cold. Snow coated the vehicle in a fast-forming shroud. Inside the cab, a woman slumped against the seat, barely conscious. Ethan moved quickly, boots cutting through knee-deep snow. Rook leapt ahead, barking once, sharp and clear, a signal rather than a warning. When Ethan pulled the door open, cold flooded the interior like a living force. Clara tried to speak, only frost escaped her lips. Ethan checked her pulse, her breathing, her pupils. His hands were steady, practiced. He tested her ankle gently. Swelling was present. Pain response was real. Structural damage, however, was minimal. She could stand. Barely. Clara felt the truth of it the moment he supported her weight. But fear surged harder than pain. If they examined her too closely, if questions followed too quickly, her presence here would unravel. The company, the maps, the intent. So she leaned heavier than necessary, letting her voice shake, letting her breath hitch. "It hurts," she whispered, making it sound like more than it was. Rook stayed close as they moved her away from the ravine, not comforting, guarding. The storm closed their tracks behind them within minutes, erasing proof of what had nearly vanished forever. Above them, the mountain finished waking, and the forest listened. The storm did not ease after the rescue. If anything, it hardened, as though the mountain itself resented having its secret taken away. Snow chased them through the trees in long white sheets, wind driving it sideways so thick that distance collapsed into blindness. Ethan drove with one hand steady on the wheel, the other ready at the radio, even though both of them knew it was useless out here. Clara sat in the passenger seat, wrapped in a heavy emergency blanket, her teeth chattering softly, not entirely from the cold. She watched his hands more than his face. Ethan Cole, up close, looked older than she had first assumed. The lines around his eyes were not from age, but from weather and wakefulness. His hair, dark with threads of gray at the temples, was cut short in the practical way of a man who had learned that mirrors were optional. There was nothing careless about him. Even his silence felt measured, as though words were tools he refused to waste. The grief he carried did not announce itself loudly, but it shaped the way he drove, the way he checked the road twice where others checked once, the way he never quite leaned back against anything. Between them, in the narrow gap of the cab, Rook sat upright, alert despite exhaustion, his breath rising in steady clouds. His powerful body filled the space with quiet authority. The light from the dashboard traced the ridge of his brow, the scar along his flank, the disciplined tension in his limbs. He did not look at Clara often, but when he did, it was never accidental. They drove for nearly an hour through snow that deepened with every mile. At last, the trees broke apart into a narrow clearing ringed by frost-coated pines, and beyond it stood a small wooden cabin, half buried under winter's first true assault. Smoke did not rise from the chimney. The place looked abandoned at a glance, but Ethan steered toward it without hesitation. "My place," he said simply. The cabin was old, built decades ago by a ranger who never trusted the comforts of town. The porch sagged slightly at one corner. The door creaked when he opened it, releasing a breath of cold pine, iron, and long-settled dust. Inside, the space was simple. One main room, a small kitchen, a narrow hallway leading to a bedroom and a washroom. No decorations beyond a faded photograph of a younger man standing beside a German shepherd, nearly identical to Rook. Ethan helped Clara inside carefully, guiding her to a wooden chair near the fireplace. Rook entered last, shaking snow from his coat with a force that rattled the doorframe, then immediately positioned himself between Clara and the exit, not blocking, guarding. Ethan lit the fire with quick, practiced movements. Soon warmth began to crawl back into the room inch by inch. He knelt in front of Clara and removed her boot with careful pressure, his hands firm but controlled. The swelling at her ankle was visible now, faint discoloration forming beneath pale skin. "Does it hurt when I do this?" he asked quietly, rotating her foot with slow precision. "Yes," Clara said too quickly, then softened it with a breath that trembled a little more than necessary. The pain was real, but it was not what she made it sound like. Ethan wrapped the ankle with an elastic bandage from a medical kit kept beneath the sink. He did not comment on the inconsistency between swelling and reaction, but something in his eyes shifted, subtle as a shadow crossing snow. He poured her a mug of hot tea and placed it in her hands. "Name?" he asked. "Clara," she said. "Clara Witt. Clara White." The near slip vanished behind the steam of the cup. "What brings you this deep into the forest in weather like that, Clara White?" he asked. She had rehearsed the story in fragments during the drive. "I'm a travel photographer," she said. "I've been following winter routes, remote towns, old trails." Rook's ears twitched. Ethan nodded once, not in belief, but in acknowledgement. "You chose the wrong week." "I see that now," she said faintly. He did not push further. Night gathered quickly outside the cabin, thickening with snowfall. Wind rattled the walls like distant surf. The forest pressed closer, heavy and breathing. Ethan set up a narrow cot near the fire for Clara and left the room without explanation. When he returned, it was with a plate of simple food, a basin of warm water, and dry clothes folded carefully atop the table. "You can clean up," he said. "I'll be outside." She did not argue. Left alone with Rook, Clara felt the full weight of the silence settle around her. The dog lay near the doorway, eyes open, unblinking. Not hostile, not kind, simply aware. Every movement she made was measured in the quiet rhythm of his breathing. When she carefully lifted her backpack and set it beside the cot, Rook rose instantly and placed himself in front of it. His low rumble was not a growl. It was a line. Clara froze. The animal did not advance, did not bare teeth. He merely stood where he stood, a living border. Slowly, she withdrew her hand. The pressure in the room eased, but the message remained. Later, when Ethan returned, she tried again with words. "Your dog doesn't like me," she said with a tired half-smile. "He doesn't know you," Ethan replied. "That's not the same thing." He checked her bandage once more before leaving her to sleep. As the fire dimmed into low orange breath and the storm sang its endless hymn against the walls, Clara lay awake, listening to Rook's steady presence and the distant voices of trees bending under snow. And for the first time since she had turned north, doubt found a place to sit beside her resolve. Morning came gray and thick, light filtered thinly through white glass. The storm had not passed, only slowed. Snow lay like a buried ocean against the cabin's door. Ethan was already awake, moving quietly through the space, with the restrained efficiency of a man who had learned to exist without ceremony. He checked the perimeter, cleared what he could, fed Rook, and returned with a simple breakfast. Clara tested her ankle carefully beneath the blanket. It ached, it pulled, but it held. Ethan noticed. "You'll heal fast," he said neutrally. "Yes," she replied, matching his tone. He did not accuse her, but the space between what she said and what he observed continued to widen. Throughout the day, as the storm trapped them together, the cabin filled with small, careful movements. Ethan repaired gear, sharpened tools, reviewed maps along the wall. Clara rested, spoke little, played the part she had chosen. When she asked polite questions about the forest, the routes, the seasons, Ethan answered them without embellishment. Rook never left his post for long. Even when he slept, it was light and measured, always between Clara and the door, always between her bag and the room. By evening, the storm softened into a whispering fall. The mountains breathed again. Ethan returned to her side with fresh bandages and removed the old wrap carefully. He pressed lightly along the joint. The swelling had receded faster than it should have. Her reaction lagged behind his touch, not enough to prove a lie, enough to plant one. "That will do," he said simply, rewrapping the ankle. "You can stand tomorrow." Slowly. Clara nodded, eyes lowered. Rook watched her without blinking, and somewhere beneath the falling snow, the mountain held its breath again. Morning did not truly arrive in Whitecrest Ridge. It merely diluted the darkness into a softer shade of gray. Snow still fell, lighter now, but relentless, feathering the forest in quiet insistence. The cabin stood half buried beneath it all, a small island of timber and firelight, holding its breath beneath the weight of winter. Inside, Clara sat near the hearth, wrapped in borrowed blankets, the warmth creeping slowly back into her bones. In daylight, her face revealed more than fatigue. The sharp discipline that had defined her the night before now wavered at the edges, replaced by something tighter and more fragile. Dark circles framed her eyes. Her hands trembled faintly when she lifted the mug of tea Ethan had left beside her. The pain in her ankle had dulled into a manageable ache, enough to remind her of the truth without betraying the lie she still carried. Across the room, Rook lay near the door, massive forelegs crossed neatly, body at rest but not relaxed. In the pale winter light, his coat showed its full pattern, deep black along the spine, warm sable flaring along the sides, frost already gathering at the edges of his fur whenever he shifted too close to the door. His amber eyes tracked every movement Clara made with tireless precision. He did not stare in challenge. He observed in purpose. When Ethan entered from outside, snow clinging to his shoulders and beard stubble, the cabin's atmosphere tightened almost imperceptibly. He moved with the quiet economy that defined him, removing gloves, hanging his coat, shaking loose the cold. At 38, he carried strength not as a display, but as a function. The muscles of his arms and shoulders spoke of years spent lifting, carrying, pulling other lives back from the edges of things that did not forgive. "The trail is buried again," he said simply. "Won't open for another day at least." Clara nodded. "That's okay." Ethan studied her for a moment, as though measuring the space between her words and what they concealed. Then he turned away and began preparing food. Throughout the day, the cabin settled into a strange, restrained rhythm. Ethan repaired harnesses and checked rescue equipment with meticulous care. Clara remained near the fire, resting, maintaining the version of herself she had presented. She asked careful questions about the forest, the weather, the routes through the ridge. Ethan answered factually, without elaboration. Each exchange was polite, neutral, balanced on a narrow line, neither of them named. Rook moved quietly between rooms, nails clicking softly against the wooden floor. Yet each time he passed Clara's backpack, which rested near the wall by the cot, his pace slowed, his nose lifted, his breathing shifted. The first time, Ethan noticed but said nothing. The second time, he narrowed his eyes slightly. To Rook, scent was not merely smell. It was language, and Clara's bag spoke in fragments that did not belong together. Beneath the surface layer of fabric and cold metal, he found the faint, precise tang of ink and processed paper. Beneath that, the dry mineral bitterness of machinery, steel, treated fibers, the kinds of traces that did not accompany wandering photographers and wandering souls. That night, as darkness closed around the cabin and wind whispered its long story through the trees, Ethan stepped outside to clear the remaining snow from the satellite antenna. His boots vanished into white within seconds. The door closed. The cabin fell into a deeper quiet. Clara sat motionless for several minutes, listening to the wind, to the muffled scrape of metal on snow outside, to Rook's steady breathing. Her heart beat too loudly. She knew the moment had arrived long before she allowed herself to accept it. Slowly, carefully, she reached for the zipper of her backpack. The sound was small, but Rook heard it. He rose instantly and placed himself directly before the bag, massive body blocking her reach with effortless certainty. No growl, no snarl, only presence, immovable and absolute. His gaze met hers, unwavering. In it was not anger. It was warning shaped by understanding. Clara swallowed. "I just need something," she whispered, as though her voice might frighten him. Rook did not move. Time stretched thin between them, taut as wire. Then, trembling, Clara withdrew her hand and slumped back against the cot. The dog held his position for a moment longer, then slowly eased back to the floor, never turning his back on the bag. Minutes later, when Ethan's footsteps returned and the door creaked open under the weight of snow, Clara waited. She waited through the scrape of boots against wood, through the sound of him setting tools aside, through the crackle of fresh logs placed on the fire. She waited for the moment when she knew she could no longer carry the weight alone. Later that night, when exhaustion finally drove her into a shallow sleep, the wind softened into a whisper, and the forest bent low beneath fresh snow. Ethan sat at the small table under the lantern's dim glow, making notes in a battered field notebook. Rook lay once again between Clara and the door, eyes closed but senses open. Clara woke quietly. She did not look at the dog. She did not look at the fire. She reached for the bag. This time, Rook did not stop her. He merely watched. The zipper slid open with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the hush. Clara's hands shook as she drew the contents out one by one. A laminated access card fell first, catching lantern light at an unforgiving angle. On it, the logo of North Star Land gleamed in stark corporate blue. Beneath it came folded satellite maps marked with grids and coded annotations. Then, a slim data tablet wrapped in protective casing, its screen faintly glowing to life. Clara stared at the evidence as if seeing it for the first time, though she had carried it for months. Behind her, Rook did not bark. His silence was heavier than any alarm could have been. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway. The lantern flickered slightly as cold followed him in. For a heartbeat, none of them moved. Then his gaze dropped to the card, to the maps, to the screen. Understanding arrived without ceremony. "You're not a photographer," Ethan said quietly. Clara's shoulders shook once, then again. The sound that broke from her was not a sob at first, but a breath she had been holding for too long. "I didn't mean for you to get involved," she said. "I didn't know the storm would come this fast." He did not step forward. "What is this place to you?" he asked. She hesitated. Then the truth, broken and imperfect, pushed its way through the narrow doorway of fear. "They're going to cut it down," she whispered. "All of it. The ridge, the lower forests, the watershed. I was supposed to prepare the data that would make it acceptable." Her eyes lifted to meet his, shining with shame. "I tried to slow it. I told myself if I could just prove how fragile it really is, someone would listen. But they don't listen to doubt. They only listen to numbers. Rook shifted slightly. He approached her not with suspicion now, but with quiet attention. He lifted his head to her knee, not touching, waiting. I came here to gather what I could before winter buried it, she continued. I told myself I was doing it for the forest, for the animals. But I was also running, from the people who signed my paycheck, from the man who raised me to believe success mattered more than consequence. Ethan's jaw tightened. You risked your life for that. I risked everything I didn't know how to lose any other way, she said. Silence settled like snow across the room. Rook did not bark because he did not sense threat in her. He sensed fracture. Fear shaped into hesitation. The heavy human scent of guilt layered thick over every word she spoke. To him, this was not a predator standing in the den. This was a creature caught between hunger and harm, trembling on the edge of choice. Ethan finally spoke. You lied to me. You lied to him. His gaze flicked briefly to Rook. You brought danger into this place. Tears spilled freely now, no longer contained. I know, Clara said, and I will pay for it. Outside, snow fell in slow, endless drifts. The forest listened without judgment. Rook exhaled softly and sat beside her at last. The storm loosened its grip slowly, as if the mountain itself were reluctant to release what it had taken. By the third morning after Clara's confession, the snowfall thinned into pale, drifting threads, and the forest emerged in quiet layers of white and shadow. The world beyond the cabin was still sealed by cold, but it no longer felt sealed by fury. Inside, time moved differently now. Truth had weight. It altered the shape of every silence. Clara moved carefully through the small space, her presence smaller than before, as if guilt had folded her inward. The sharp edge of her professional composure had dulled into something raw. She spoke less. She watched Ethan more. The lie about being a photographer had fallen apart, but the lie about her injury still remained, clinging to her like a final shield. Her ankle had healed faster than she expected. The swelling had faded to faint discoloration. The constant ache had become a distant reminder, like the echo of a bruise pressed days ago. When she tested it secretly at night, shifting her weight in slow increments beside the cot, her body answered with steadiness rather than protest. She could walk. She chose not to. Ethan Cole noticed the change before he allowed himself to name it. He had spent too many years reading people in moments where truth and survival rarely match to ignore a subtle contradiction. On the second day after the revelation of her identity, he offered to recheck her ankle. Let's see how it's healing, he said, his tone even. Clara hesitated only a fraction of a second before nodding. He knelt in front of her as he had before, his hands firm and clinical as he loosened the bandage. The joint looked almost normal now. Only faint traces of inflammation remained along the outer edge. Does it hurt when I press here? He asked quietly. Yes, Clara said, again too quickly. He pressed again, slightly harder, watching her eyes rather than her foot. The delayed flicker of reaction arrived half a heartbeat late. Ethan rewrapped the ankle without comment. He did not accuse her, but the lie took its place in the room like a second shadow. Throughout that day, the cabin felt narrower. The fire cracked louder. The wind whispered more insistently through the trees. Rook paced in short, silent circuits between window and door, pausing now and then to glance toward Clara with eyes that no longer searched for danger, but for coherence. Dogs, after all, understood when a story no longer matched the scent of the teller. As evening fell, Ethan prepared to hike to the nearest ridge where he might briefly catch radio contact with the outer patrol network. The storm had torn apart most transmission routes, but the clearing sky offered a slim chance of signal. I won't be long, he said, fastening his coat. Rook rose immediately. No, Ethan said gently. Stay. The dog hesitated, torn between duty and instinct, then obeyed with visible restraint. He lay down near the door, muscles tense beneath his thick fur, eyes following Ethan until the door closed behind him. Silence settled again. Clara sat alone with the fire and the weight of what she had not yet admitted. The cabin felt different without Ethan's steady presence anchoring its edges. The lie pressed harder now, no longer protected by immediate necessity. She tested her ankle once more. It held, her breath caught. The choice arrived without ceremony. Slowly she stood. For a moment, she waited for pain that did not come. Then she took a step. Then another. Each movement was careful but unbroken. The floor did not tilt. The world did not narrow. She walked. Across the room, Rook's head lifted. He rose in one smooth motion, posture shifting instantly from stillness to alert. His gaze locked onto her ankle. The truth moved between them without sound. Clara froze. "I just needed to see if I could," she whispered, though no one but the dog could hear. Rook did not approach, but he did something far more dangerous. He barked. The sound tore through the cabin like a split in glass, sharp, commanding, impossible to ignore. It was not fear, it was signal, a working call shaped by training and loyalty. The echo had not yet faded when the door burst open and cold air flooded the room. Ethan stood in the doorway, snow clinging to his shoulders, eyes already searching. He saw her standing, fully upright, balanced. The space between them collapsed in a single, breathless instant. Clara's face drained of color. Her hands fell helplessly to her sides. The carefully constructed narrative she had clung to shattered without resistance now. Ethan did not shout. That somehow made it worse. He stepped inside and closed the door slowly behind him. The wind's voice was cut away, leaving only the crackle of fire and the rhythmic presence of three breathing beings forced into the same truth. "You're walking," he said. Clara swallowed. "It stopped hurting this morning." "You told me it still hurt." She lowered her eyes. "I was afraid." He moved closer, each step controlled, deliberate. Rook stood between them, not as a barrier, but as witness. "You were afraid of what?" Ethan asked. "Of being sent away," she whispered. "Of being alone in that storm with no protection. Of losing the only place that felt safe after everything collapsed." Ethan's jaw tightened. "So you lied?" "Yes." "Again?" She did not deny it. For several seconds, the only sound was the quiet hunger of fire consuming wood. Then Ethan spoke the words that did the most damage, not because they were loud, but because they were exact. "You could have lied to me," he said slowly, "and I would have handled that, but you should not have lied to him." His eyes shifted to Rook. The dog stood utterly still, amber gaze steady, unblinking, reflecting firelight and something deeper that did not flicker. Clara's breath broke. "I never meant to use him," she said, tears spilling now without restraint. "I just didn't know how to stop using the lie once it started." Ethan's voice hardened. "He guards what he believes is true. That's his duty. When you made him guard a lie, you made him protect something that did not deserve his loyalty." The words landed with the blunt finality of stone. Clara dropped to her knees, not because she had been commanded to, but because her legs no longer remembered how to hold her. "I will leave," she said through shaking breath. "As soon as the trail opens, I will go. I won't ask anything more from you, or from him." Ethan did not answer immediately. His gaze remained on her for a long moment, searching not for remorse, but for understanding. When he finally spoke, it was quieter. "You already took something," he said. "Trust doesn't come back the way a trail does. Snow melts. What breaks inside a living thing doesn't always follow the seasons." Rook stepped forward once, not toward Clara, but toward the space between them. He sat, not in forgiveness, in vigilance. Ethan exhaled slowly and turned away. "Rest. We'll talk in the morning." He moved to the far side of the cabin, leaving Clara where she knelt, the truth finally fully visible around her. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. Inside, the mountain broke its silence without sound. Spring did not arrive gently in Whitecrest City. It came like a cautious guest, testing the doorway with pale light and reluctant warmth, uncertain whether it would be welcomed after such a long, punishing winter. Snow receded from sidewalks in uneven scars. The river broke its ice with slow, aching groans. The mountain remained white long after the town remembered how to breathe without frost. Clara returned to the city alone. No rescue truck followed her back this time. No watchful German shepherd guarded her steps. The forest released her without ceremony, and the road carried her south beneath skies that no longer threatened collapse. The glass towers of downtown Whitecrest reflected a version of her she barely recognized. Her face was thinner. The sharp control that once defined her was fractured by something quieter and more dangerous. Resolve that no longer feared consequence. She reported directly to North Star Land headquarters the morning after her return. The boardroom had not changed. The walls were still glass. The table still shone with polished certainty. The men and women around it sat with the same calm authority she once trusted. Matthew Hargrove stood when she entered. His expression held polite surprise, nothing more. "We assumed you'd be unreachable for another few weeks," he said mildly. "Winter delays." "I brought winter back with me," Clara replied. She placed the data drive on the table. It was small, almost fragile. It carried the weight of a forest. The first hours were not dramatic. There were no shouted accusations, only questions delivered with clinical patience. How she obtained the data, where she gathered it, whether the numbers could be verified. Clara answered each one slowly, carefully, without embellishment and without apology. The storm that had nearly killed her remained outside the telling. It did not serve the truth she needed them to hear. By mid-afternoon, the tone shifted. Doubts hardened into displeasure. Displeasure curdled into threat. "You acted without authorization," Hargrove said finally. "You violated field protocols. You risked company liability." "I risked my life," Clara replied evenly. "That was your choice. And this," she said, tapping the drive once, "is also mine." The meeting ended without resolution. 2 days later, she was summoned again. This time, not only by the company, but by her father. Richard Whitmore had built his reputation in steel and land long before Clara learned how to ride a bicycle. His hair had gone fully silver now, his back slightly bowed by age, but not by defeat. In public, he was known as a man of disciplined generosity. In private, he was known as a man who did not bend without leaving fractures behind. "You've placed yourself directly in the path of people who do not forgive easily," he said, seated across from her in a quiet restaurant overlooking the river. "Including me." Clara held his gaze. "You taught me to recognize leverage." His mouth tightened. "I taught you survival." "They don't have to be the same thing," she said. Silence lingered between them, heavy with history neither wished to dismantle aloud. Finally, Richard exhaled slowly. "If you continue this, you will not work in this industry again," he said. "No firm will touch you. You will be marked as a liability." "I know. And you will be alone." Clara's eyes softened, but did not waver. "I already was. I just didn't know it yet." The next 4 months unfolded like a long, grinding winter after winter. North Star Land moved quickly at first, filing internal complaints, demanding retractions, questioning the legality of Clara's data collection. Then Clara moved faster. She submitted the full ecological assessment directly to the Environmental Preservation Review Committee, bypassing corporate mediation entirely. The hearing was scheduled within weeks. That was when the real pressure began. Phone calls vanished into silence. Invitations evaporated. Former colleagues crossed the street to avoid her. Anonymous warnings arrived without return addresses. Clara's professional reputation, once polished and ascending, began to disintegrate under the quiet machinery of corporate retaliation. She sold her apartment to cover legal fees. She slept on borrowed couches. She learned the true shape of exhaustion. But she did not withdraw a single document. When the hearings began, the room was packed with lawyers, consultants, observers, and silent investors who pretended neutrality while counting outcomes. Clara took the stand with hands steady and voice unadorned. She did not dramatize. She did not ask for sympathy. She spoke only of watersheds, root systems, wildlife corridors, slope erosion, avalanche risk amplified by deforestation, the collapse of the ridge's natural flood controls. "This is not a forest," she said quietly. "It is a living structure. And when you remove a structure's spine, you should not be surprised when it can no longer stand." North Star's attorneys dismantled her credentials with elegant aggression. They questioned her motives, her loyalties, her independence. They suggested personal grievances, political agendas, emotional instability following a field accident no one but she could verify. She withstood all of it. The turning point came unexpectedly, not from her data, but from the land itself. Late spring runoff arrived earlier than predicted. Without warning, a portion of Whitecrest Ridge suffered a partial slope collapse along a section scheduled for early timber road development. No one was injured, but the soil movement exposed exactly what Clara had warned of: unstable subsurface layers held in place only by the dense, ancient root network now marked for removal. The mountain testified in its own voice. Within weeks, the committee ruled in favor of immediate suspension of the North Star project pending long-term environmental reassessment. 4 months after Clara first placed the data drive on the boardroom table, the Whitecrest Ridge Extraction Initiative was formally terminated. The forest was transferred into protected status. The victory was not clean. North Star Land issued a public statement of strategic redirection. Clara received no apology. Her contract was quietly dissolved. No future offers arrived. She did not return to corporate work. Instead, she joined a small non-profit environmental protection organization operating on donated resources and stubborn optimism. The salary barely covered rent. The work consumed her days. For the first time in years, she slept without measuring upward trajectory. One final obligation remained: the cabin. Months earlier, the bank that held the cabin's mortgage had unexpectedly notified Ethan of a significant anonymous payment applied to the balance. The amount was exact, not generous, not symbolic, precise. The payment arrived through a conservation trust acting on behalf of a private donor whose name was shielded by policy. Ethan read the notice twice before believing it. Rook sniffed the envelope and sneezed once, unimpressed. The message arrived a week later in a small, plain box. Inside was a red rubber ball, scuffed at the edges, the kind used for endless throwing and endless return. Beneath it lay a single folded card. "Thank you for trusting someone who did not deserve it." Rook took the ball and carried it to the door. He waited. Spring came to Whitecrest Ridge the way forgiveness often does: late, uncertain, and carrying scars from what it had survived. Snow still clung to the high shadows beneath the trees, stubborn and gray at the edges, but water ran freely beneath it now, murmuring its quiet return through channels long sealed by ice. The mountain no longer roared. It whispered. The cabin stood unchanged. Its porch had begun to sag less beneath snow's retreat. The roof dripped steadily in the warming light. The forest breathed again, tentative but alive. Rook lay in the sun just beyond the doorway, his coat shedding the last of winter in slow, drifting tufts that caught the light like soft ash. He lifted his head as the wind shifted, ears angling forward, listening not to sound, but to meaning. Inside, Ethan Cole worked silently at the table. Winter had left its mark on him, not in new scars, but in deeper stillness. The months since Clara's departure had folded into routine: patrols through melting trails, repairs to storm-damaged routes, long nights where the fire spoke more than he did. He had not spoken her name aloud since she left, not to Rook, not to himself. The cabin had been paid for. He knew that. The notice still rested in a drawer beneath the table. He did not open it anymore. Some truths did not need repeating to remain heavy. Outside, the sound of an engine rose faintly through the trees. Rook was on his feet instantly, not barking, not growling, listening. The old pickup truck broke into the clearing slowly, paint dulled by age, one headlight dimmer than the other, its tires cutting careful lines through soft spring mud. The engine cut. The silence that followed was enormous. The door opened. Clara stepped down onto the earth she had once nearly vanished from. She looked smaller than the mountain now, thinner, lighter in some ways that had nothing to do with weight. Her dark hair was loose, touched by wind. The rigid authority she once wore so naturally had fallen away. What remained was steadiness without armor. Her face carried exhaustion, but also release, like a traveler who no longer raced the horizon. Rook broke into motion before the air could fully settle. He ran, not the controlled charge of a working dog, but the pure, uncommanded sprint of recognition. His paws struck wet earth in a rhythm too fast for doubt. He crossed the clearing in seconds and reached Clara with a force that nearly knocked her backward. She laughed once, breathless, unguarded, as his weight met her knees and his tail blurred the air behind him. "Hey," she whispered, sinking down into the mud without care, arms closing around his thick neck. "Hey, you." Rook's breath came quick with joy. He pressed his forehead against her shoulder and stayed there, as if anchoring something that had drifted too long. Ethan watched from the doorway. He did not move. His face remained carved in stillness, but the muscles along his jaw tightened, subtly, betrayed by nothing but years of practiced restraint. He had not invited this moment. He had not prepared for it. The forest had chosen it for him. Clara saw him then. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The space between them held months of consequence, stretched thin and trembling. Clara rose slowly to her feet, brushing dirt from her jeans with absent care. The laughter had already faded from her face, replaced by something far more deliberate. "I won't come closer," she said quietly, "if you don't want me to." Ethan did not respond. Rook sat between them, tail still, eyes flicking from one to the other. Clara took a single step forward, then stopped. Her breath caught. The words she had carried with her across seasons pressed against her ribs, but she did not release them yet. Instead, she lowered herself to the ground again. She knelt. Not in performance. In decision. "I lost everything to keep this forest standing," she said softly, eyes lowered, palms open against the earth. "My job, my standing, my father's respect, the future I was raised to chase. I didn't do it to be forgiven. I did it because I couldn't live with the alternative." Her voice did not waver. "I won't ask you to trust me again. I only wanted you to know that what happened here mattered to me beyond survival." The forest stirred gently behind her. Ethan closed his eyes. For a long time, he said nothing. The silence between them was not empty. It was working, sorting memory, weighing damage, measuring what had been broken against what had been paid for. When he opened his eyes again, his gaze fell not on Clara, but on Rook. The dog had turned back toward him, amber eyes steady, waiting without pleading. Ethan's voice, when it finally came, was quiet and unadorned. "You could have stayed away." Clara nodded. "I know. You didn't. I couldn't." The air shifted between them, fragile as frost and shade. He studied her face, not searching for beauty, not for apology, but for coherence. The woman kneeling before him did not resemble the one who had lied in the firelight months before. This one carried loss openly. This one did not brace against consequence. This one had already endured it. Ethan exhaled slowly. Then he spoke the words that altered the mountain's breath. "Come inside," he said. "The forest is still cold." He stepped aside, not far, just enough. Clara did not rush. She rose carefully, as if standing too quickly might fracture what had just been offered. She crossed the clearing with measured steps. When she reached the threshold, she hesitated only once. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan did not answer. Rook moved first, leading them both inside, as if nothing in the world had ever been in doubt. The fire was already burning low when they entered. Ethan added a log without ceremony. Clara stood near the door, warming her hands in silence. The cabin felt altered, not lighter, not heavier, but rearranged around new boundaries no one had yet named. They spoke little that evening. No explanations were offered, no promises exchanged. They shared only what survival required: food, warmth, presence. Outside, snow receded another inch. Spring did not make grand announcements. It simply stayed. In the quiet ending of this journey, we are reminded that the miracles of God do not always arrive with thunder or fire. Sometimes they come through a loyal dog that refuses to give up, through a broken woman who chooses truth over comfort, through a man who learns that forgiveness can grow even in frozen ground. In our daily lives, we all face moments where fear tells us to stay silent and pain tells us to walk away. But God still works quietly in those moments, guiding our steps even when we cannot see the road ahead. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment to tell us your thoughts and type Amen if you believe in the gentle miracles God sends into our lives. May God bless you and your family with peace, protection, and strength in every season. And please remember to support our channel by pressing subscribe so we can continue bringing stories of faith, loyalty, and redemption to you.